Spirit of St. Clair. The general tone of the press and of the community in the slave states, so far as it has been made known at the North, has been loudly condemnatory of the representations of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Still, it would be unjust to the character of the South to refuse to acknowledge that she has many sons with candor enough to perceive and courage enough to avow the evils of her peculiar institutions. The manly independence exhibited by these men in communities where popular sentiment rules despotically, either by law or in spite of law, should be duly honored. The sympathy of such minds as these is a high encouragement to philanthropic effort. The author inserts a few testimonials from Southern men, not without some pride in being thus kindly judged by those who might have been naturally expected to read her book with prejudice against it. The Jefferson Inquirer, published at Jefferson City, Missouri, October 23, 1852, contains the following communication. Uncle Tom's Cabin. I have lately read this celebrated book, which perhaps has gone through more editions and been sold in greater numbers than any work from the American press in the same length of time. It is a work of high literary finish, and its several characters are drawn with great power and truthfulness, although, like the characters in most novels and works of fiction, in some instances too highly colored. There is no attack on slaveholders as such, but on the contrary, many of them are represented as highly noble, generous, humane, and benevolent. Nor is there any attack upon them as a class. It sets forth many of the evils of slavery as an institution established by law, but without charging these evils on those who hold the slaves, and seems fully to appreciate the difficulties in finding a remedy. Its effect upon the slaveholder is to make him a kinder and better master, to which none can object. This is said without any intention to endorse everything contained in the book, or indeed in any novel or work of fiction. But if I mistake not, there are few, excepting those who are greatly prejudiced, that will rise from a perusal of the book without being a truer and better Christian and a more humane and benevolent man. As a slaveholder, I do not feel the least aggrieved. How Mrs. Stowe, the authoress, has obtained her extremely accurate knowledge of the Negroes, their character, dialect, habits, etc., is beyond my comprehension, as she never resided, it appears from the preface, in a slave state, or among slaves or Negroes. But they are certainly admirably delineated. The book is highly interesting and amusing, and will afford a rich treat to its reader. Thomas Jefferson. The opinion of the editor himself is given in these words. Uncle Tom's Cabin. Well, like a good portion of the world and the rest of mankind, we have read the book of Mrs. Stowe bearing the above title. From numerous statements, newspaper paragraphs, and rumors, we suppose the book was all that fanaticism and heresy could invent, and were therefore greatly prejudiced against it. But on reading it, we cannot refrain from saying that it is a work of more than ordinary moral worth, and is entitled to consideration. We do not regard it as a corruption of moral sentiment and a gross libel on a portion of our people. The authoress seems disposed to treat the subject fairly, though in some particulars the scenes are too highly colored and too strongly drawn from the imagination. The book, however, may lead its readers at a distance to misapprehend some of the general and better features of Southern life as it is, which, by the way, we as an individual prefer to Northern life. Yet it is a perfect mirror of several classes of people we have in our mind's eye, who are not free from all the ills flesh is heir to. It has been feared that the book would result in injury to the slaveholding interests of the country, but we apprehend no such thing, and hesitate not to recommend it to the perusal of our friends and the public generally. Mrs. Stowe has exhibited a knowledge of many peculiarities of Southern society, which is really wonderful when we consider that she is a Northern lady by birth and residence. We hope, then, before our friends form any harsh opinions of the merits of Uncle Tom's Cabin and make up any judgment against us for pronouncing in its favor, barring some objections to it, that they will give it a careful perusal, and in so speaking, we may say that we yield to no man in his devotion to Southern rights and interests. The editor of the St. Louis, Missouri Battery pronounces the following judgment. We took up this work a few evenings since with just such prejudices against it as we presume many others have commenced reading it. We have been so much in contact with ultra-abolitionists, have had so much evidence that their benevolence was much more hatred for the master than love for the slave, accompanied with a profound ignorance of the circumstances surrounding both, and a most consummate supreme disgust for the whole Negro race, that we had about concluded that anything but rant and nonsense was out of the question from a Northern writer upon the subject of slavery. Mrs. Stowe, in these delineations of life among the lowly, has convinced us to the contrary. She brings to the discussion of her subject a perfectly cool, calculating judgment, a wide, all-comprehending intellectual vision, and a deep, warm, sea-like woman's soul, over all of which is flung a perfect iris-like imagination, which makes the light of her pictures stronger and more beautiful as their shades are darker and terror-striking. We do not wonder that the copy before us is of the 70th thousand, and 70,000 more will not supply the demand, or we mistake the appreciation of the American people of the real merits of literary productions. Mrs. Stowe has, in Uncle Tom's Cabin, set up for herself a monument more enduring than marble. It will stand amid the wastes of slavery, as Memnon stands amid the sands of the African desert, telling both the white man and the Negro of the approach of morning. The book is not an abolitionist work, in the offensive sense of the word. It is, as we have intimated, free from everything like fanaticism, no matter what amount of enthusiasm vivifies every page, and runs like electricity along every thread of the story. It presents at one view the excellencies and the evils of the system of slavery, and breathes the true spirit of Christian benevolence for the slave and charity for the master. The next witness gives his testimony in a letter to the New York Evening Post. Light in the South. The subjoined communication comes to us postmarked New Orleans, June 19, 1852. I have just been reading Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Scenes in Lowly Life, by Mrs. Harriet Beecher Stowe. It found its way to me through the channel of a young student who purchased it at the North to read on his homeward passage to New Orleans. He was entirely unacquainted with its character. He was attracted by its title, supposed it might amuse him while traveling. Through his family, it was shown to me as something that I would probably like. I looked at the author's name and said, "Oh yes, anything from that lady I will read. Otherwise I should have disregarded a work of fiction with such a title." The remarks from persons present were that it was a most amusing work, and the scenes most admirably drawn to life. I accepted the offer of a perusal of it and brought it home with me. Although I have not read every sentence, I have looked over the whole of it, and I now wish to bear my testimony to its delineation of the position that the slave occupies. Colorings in the work there are, but no colorings of the actual and real position of the slave worse than really exist. Whippings to death do occur. I know it to be so. Painful separations of master and slave under circumstances creditable to the master's feelings of humanity do also occur. I know that too. Many families, after having brought up their children in entire dependence on slaves to do everything for them, and after having been indulged in elegances and luxuries, have exhausted all their means, and the black people only being left, whom they must sell for further support. Running away, everybody knows, is the worst crime a slave can commit in the eyes of his master, except it be a humane master, and from such few slaves care to run away. I am a slaveholder myself. I have long been dissatisfied with the system, particularly since I have made the Bible my criterion for judging of it. I am convinced from what I read there, slavery is not in accordance with what God delights to honor in his creatures. I am altogether opposed to the system, and I intend always to use whatever influence I may have against it. I feel very bold in speaking against it, though living in the midst of it, because I am backed by a powerful arm that can overturn and overrule the strongest efforts that the determined friends of slavery are now making for its continuance.